The first newspaper ever published in America was in 1690 and was called Public Occurrences. However, the first Native American paper wasn't published until almost 200 years later. This sparked a change in Native American communication that forever altered the spread of news throughout tribes. The Papers of the People, Native American newspapers throughout history. In 1828, Andrew Jackson was elected John Quincy Adams' spot as the President of the United States of America in the upcoming year. This was the beginning of the Jacksonian period, which, during, the United States made 86 treaties with 26 indigenous nations that forced Native Americans off their land. This pressure to move started to build up from the federal government more and more every year. In 1828, only 3 years before the extremely deadly Trail of Tears, the Cherokee people realized that they had to have a way to unite. The Cherokee Phoenix was the very first Native American-run newspaper. Before this, most Native American newspapers were extremely racist and often run by whites who had the main goal of assimilating Native Americans.
We were already getting pressure from Georgians and the United States government to leave our lands and go west. And our tribal council at the time thought, if we tried to assimilate more, we were already doing that, building schools and homes and farming, just trying to act like our white neighbors, basically. And form a government, things like that we could stay, that they would see that we were equals and we could, they would treat us better. And part of that assimilation process was the newspaper, something to actually also to communicate with our people, to tell them what was going on with the government, local area news, and just share information coming from from the government towards the rest of the tribal members.
In 1830, Andrew Jackson was quoted saying, "It gives me pleasure to announce to Congress that the benevolent policy of the government, steadily pursued for nearly 30 years in relation to the removal of the Indians beyond the white settlements, is approaching to a happy consummation." This reflected the common ideals held by most white Americans at the time. Having the Cherokee Phoenix allowed for the Native American point of view to be shared. This was the first paper that was for Native Americans that was actually run by Native Americans. A member of the Cherokee tribe, Elias Boondenau, called Galagina, or the Buck, was appointed as the editor-in-chief. His pamphlet, an address to the whites in 1826, was based on a speech he made in Philadelphia. This, combined with Boondenau being extremely effective in fundraising, he landed the job. This quote from the first issue demonstrates the overall mission of the paper. As the Phoenix is a national newspaper, we shall feel ourselves bound to devote it to national purposes. The laws and public documents of the nation and matters relating to the welfare and condition of the Cherokees as a people will be faithfully published in Cherokee and English. As the liberty of the press is so essential to the improvement of the mind, we shall consider our paper a free paper, with, however, proper and usual restrictions. But the columns of this newspaper shall always be open to free and temperate discussions on matters of politics, religion, and so forth. It was vital for every member of the Cherokee tribe to understand the newspaper, so the Cherokee Phoenix was printed in both English and Cherokee. This paper was intended to show adamant resistance against Cherokee removal, so that the Cherokee people would stand up for their culture and their way of life. Boondenau, even though he was a Cherokee and Native American himself, was an advocate for Cherokee removal. He started to publish his ideas into the newspaper, which did not align with the leadership of the Cherokee Nation, nor the vast majority of Cherokee people. In 1832, Boondenau was replaced with Elijah Hicks, who had opposing views, meaning he was against relocation. This allowed the paper to continue in support of Native American culture and against assimilation. Eventually, the Cherokee Phoenix, which had now been renamed the Cherokee Phoenix and Indians Advocate, ran out of funding in 1834. However, this was not the end of the paper. It came back as the Cherokee Advocate from 1844 to 1906. Much later, the Cherokee Phoenix came back under the same name in 2000 and is available now both in print and virtually. The Cherokee Phoenix allowed, for the first time, Native American voice readily available and untainted by racism. The wide distrust of the American government became a block to Native Americans uniting and receiving up-to-date news from a trusted news source. Creating a paper that was specifically for Cherokees and from their own people allowed news to be received quickly and trustfully. The Cherokee Phoenix opened the door for more Native American newspapers. However, unfortunately, not until much later. Adahonichichi was the second paper to be published in native language, this being Navajo. Adahonichichi was first published in 1943 and ran until 1957. This was then replaced with the Navajo Times.
Penalsos means like the paper. So to translate that as the people's newspaper. People's paper. We are owned by the Navajo people. That makes a difference to us and to all our readers. They all understand that.
The Navajo Times is still currently in print. The Cherokee Phoenix has paved the way for other newspapers like the Adahonichichi to represent other Native American tribes. It was, and still is, vital for every tribe to have a trustworthy news source that is easily accessible, run by people of the tribe, or close to the tribe. Now, there are hundreds of Native American newspapers currently in circulation. There is the Biskinik for the Choctaw Nation, Charcusta for the Flathead Reservation, the Chickasaw Times for the Chickasaw Nation, to only name a few. These newspapers help keep Native American culture intact and cover news in an increasingly widespread audience. Now, Native American voice is easily accessible by a simple Google search. Native American newspapers have been a vessel for Native Americans to unite together for almost 200 years. As a community that has continually struggled with trying to be torn apart, having a way to spread news and keep entire tribes informed was and is instrumental. However, the full impact of these newspapers cannot fully take effect due to the multitude of barriers that Native American newspapers have to break.
Just like newspapers all across the country, Native American journalism is kind of having a crisis. Readership is down, print is up. Most tribal outlets rely on like the print product, which is not what young people are wanting to read anymore. So I think something's going to have to happen here soon about like switching business models or quickly adapting to like app-based news.
Today, only 17% of staff in the newsroom are not white. This does not align with the current population being made up 37% of minorities in the United States. To compound this, less than 3% of leadership in newsrooms is Native American. Native American newspapers allow for Native voice to be heard. The unique and vital perspective of Native Americans is shown throughout tribal papers.
But we want to make sure that all of our members what we call at large, the people who are outside of the nation, are also included and informed on what's going on in their tribe. We never want them to feel like they're forgotten. We also, every month, we encourage our members from all over the country to send us their stories, to send us their accomplishments. We want to be the voice of all Choctaw people, no matter whether they're living on the reservation or not, that they know, that they're aware of those traditions and culture and language.
Communication is ever-changing. This is especially evident when you look at the development of communication throughout Native American tribes that was directly influenced by tribal newspapers. These newspapers not only provided a way of receiving news that directly influenced Native American tribes, but provided a way for Native Americans to unify in times of division.